morning, students. So today we'll see the further part of the key management, nothing but the certificate revocation and identity-based encryption. So these are the 2 points we are going to see in today's video. So first one, in that it's a revocation scenarios. The validity period of an X.509 certificate is always contained in the certificate. So, however, there are other reasons why a seemingly valid certificate may actually be invalid. Now, consider here a scenario 1. Suppose there is a subject called as a Prashant who was issued a certificate valid between the January 1, 2010 and December 31, 2010. Suppose he quits the organization on April 1, 2010. Then assume that the Prashant certificate is to be used for key exchange or authentication and that he has made a copy of it. So public key in a key exchange certificate is used by another party to encrypt a random session key. And the session key itself is then used to encrypt all messages in both the directions for duration of the ensuing session. So now if the communication takes place between this, even though the Prashant has left the organization on April 1st, 2010, in his certificate, the expiration date has mentioned it as a December 31st, 2010. So, the same certificate, it has been used by the other party for the communication purpose. In practice, it's a invalid even though we make use of it. So this is a one scenario. So now in the second scenario, consider a single chain in a public key infrastructure. Suppose the private key here, the private key of the certification authority 3 were compromised. An attacker with access to the compromised private key could then do the following. He may generate a public key private key pair, suppose it's X, Y, create a certificate containing the public key X with the subject name U, and sign the above certificate using the compromised private key of a certification authority 3. The attacker has thus created a fictitious entity U dash masquerading as a legitimate subject U. Now the attacker can forge the signature of U on any message by signing with the private key Y. The attacker would provide a certificate chain of 2 certificates, the certificate issued by CA1 vouching for CA3's public key and the above certificate created by him. This chain is valid trust path from the root CA to the subject U. So using the public key of a CA1 and the certificate chain, the verifier would accept the fraudulent signature generated using Y as an authenticate signature of U. So as these are the 2 scenarios, so we need to handle this certificate revocation. So first one is a handling revocations. So for one solution, what we can provide to the problem is to use an online facility that provides information on the current status of digital signatures. For this purpose, a protocol called Online Certificate Status Protocol is employed. So this nullifies the principal advantage of digital signature in the first place, and there is a need for an online public key information facility. So this is the first one where we can make use of this Online Certificate Status Protocol. By using this, we'll come to know whether that certificate is a valid or invalid, whether it has expired or not. Then the second solution, what it says is that distribute list of revoked certificates, that is which we call it as a certificate revocation list. The frequency of list updation is an important consideration. So if the CRLs are distributed too frequently, they could consume considerable bandwidth. On the other hand, if they were distributed infrequently, information on recently revoked certificates may not reach those who need it in a timely fashion. So in both the above solutions, the one is on the verifier to make sure that the certificate is currently valid. By contrast, it is possible to design a system wherein the signer requests the cooperation of a trusted third party in generating a signature. So that is what we have provided in the third solution. That is, design a system wherein the signer requests the cooperation of a trusted third party in generating the signature. Both the signer and the TTP have a part of the private key, with neither party knowing the other part. To sign a document, the signer would contact the TTP. Before requesting to sign, the TTP could check whether the signer's certificate has been revoked and participate only if the signer's certificate has not been revoked. Indeed, the TTP may itself maintain certificate revocation information. The TTP may also act as a timestamp authority and certify the time at which the document is signed. This may be done, for example, by signing a value obtained by concatenating a timestamp with the hash value of the document. So next one, we have its identity-based encryption. So in this identity-based encryption, first part is a preliminaries. The digital certificate is a verifiable way of communicating the public key of an entity. Certificates are transmitted along with the messages for the purposes such as authentication, signature verification, and encryption. An alternative to digital certificates emerged in 1984 in the form of identity-based encryption. Shamias used a scheme wherein a person's public key could be computed as a function of that person's unique credentials, such as his or her email address. Thus, anyone can reliably compute A's public key only knowing A's email address, for example. Then IBE assumes the use of TTP called private key generator. So next we'll see how this generic IBE scheme works. So now if you see here a figure, the first step is the PKG, that is private key generator, has a private key and associated public key parameters. For example, it's a email ID. To obtain a private key, A informs the PKG that she wishes to receive a private key corresponding to her ID. Say it's a alka@iit.ac.in. It is the email ID of the A, and she wants to have a communication by obtaining the private key by using this email ID. Then PKG makes sure that the credential does indeed belong to A. Then the PKG also makes sure that this ID is universally unique. If so, he generates a private key for A, which is a function of her ID and the private key of the PKG. The PKG then securely transmits the private key to A. So with the knowledge of the PKG's public parameters and A's unique ID, anyone can compute A's public key. So here, to compute the private key, so it is a function of email ID and the private key of a PKG, as the public key parameters of the PKGs will be known to A. Based on that, they can compute the A's private key. So next one is a bilinear mapping, which is used to implement this identity-based encryption. A bilinear mapping, suppose it's a B of x comma y, maps any pair of elements from one given set to an element in a second set. The term bilinear follows from the following property mapping. So it is going to have a property as B of k1 into u1 plus k2 into u2 comma v is equal to k1 into B of u1 comma v plus k2 into B of u2 comma v. Here u1, u2 and v are the elements of the first set, and k1 and k2 are the integer constants. So here is one example. We are going to see here, let u is equal to 2, 4, 1 and v is equal to 5, 3, 2. then composition of these two, we will be getting the result as a 24. Next, we need to verify the dot product is a bilinear operation. So now suppose the value of u1 is this, that is 2, 4, 5. U2 is 7, 1, 2. K1 value is a 3 and K2 value is a 4. So now by using the previous equation, that is this, we will be first calculating the left hand side part and we are calculating the right hand part separately and will be comparing these two values. So if you now K1 into U1 plus K2 into U2 is this, and we are getting the result like this. It's a dot product of the vector. So we'll be getting the result as 264. Now we'll be calculating the right hand part. So it is K1 into U1 dot V plus K2 into U2 dot V. So after calculating, we'll be getting the same result, that is 264. So based on these two values, we can say the dot product is a bilinear operation. So this is what the chapter key management completes.